All right, so we're in Daniel still, and we're going to be in chapter 3. It was trying to move us to chapter 4. She was disappointed that she hadn't read that chapter, and I was like, I haven't either. Read so chapter 3 still. So in chapter 3, we're going to have a story that's going to be very, very familiar. It's one of those that if you went to Bible class as a small child, you were taught it. If you were a Bible class teacher of those small children, you would have taught it. It's one of those that is great to go read because it's this great story of faith and all that kind of stuff. So tonight, the story is the fire furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay, so you know the story, so I'm going to kind of make some assumptions of your knowledge about that. All right, if you don't know it, go read the story. It's it's a great biblical testimony as we do that. So, with that being said, last week in chapter 2, we had Daniel interpret the king's dream. And in interpreting that dream, he is able to tell the dream back to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, and explain to him what the dream meant. Right? So, if you will recall, he was talking about, or he tells him about his vision, which was of a statue. And the statue represents multiple kingdoms, because we have the head, which is Nebuchadnezzar, and it's made of gold. And then we have, these other precious metals till we get down to iron, and finally clay for the feet. Clay and iron mixed together, right? And so the idea is that there's going to be these kingdoms that are going to come after King Nebuchadnezzar. And, we can place some kingdoms on that, but the reality is we're not real sure. We can fill in the blanks, and we can come pretty accurately. I definitely think historically we've got good answers to that, but it doesn't really matter. The point was that you're going to be king, and another kingdom's coming after you. God is able to reveal to Daniel this dream. So I remind you of that because in chapter 3, in verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits, and its width was 6 cubits, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. All right. So, depending on what your Bible says, and it's one of those where the difficulty is in translation, trying to get exactly what they said. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image. He made a statue or something, right? And so, depending on how this is translated, you could say that King Nebuchadnezzar made a god, and so there were some that have thrown out different types of gods that it might have been. The other possibility was that King Nebuchadnezzar was making a statue of himself. And I think it probably goes to that. And here's why. In the statue, God that we have in chapter 2, God reveals to Nebuchadnezzar what's going to happen in the future. He says, God's told you what's going to happen. Your kingdom is going to be superseded by another, and by another, and by another. If you are a God, are you supposed to die? Not Jesus notwithstanding, because I got it. Jesus died on our behalf. But I'm just saying, in general thinking, do gods die? No, right? They're supposed to be eternal. That's part of the whole God description, is that it's beyond the touch of the mortal body. And that's the reality. Is we're talking about a mortal and an immortal, a human being and a God. A God, by definition, is going to be immortal. So if you're going to make yourself a statue, and you're going to be the subject of that statue, and you just had a dream that said, you're the head, but then there's another one after you, and another one after you, and another one after you, that portrays an image of mortality, because you're going to die and be replaced. What does he make the whole statue out of, from top to bottom? Gold. I think what Nebuchadnezzar is doing is setting up himself as God in this picture, and he is going to be everlasting. And that this vision that God gave him, he is going to take control of it, and he is going to live forever and be the everlasting king. Yeah, could you?
Just so that we can understand it a little better on the size of that thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was 90 feet high and 9 feet wide.
So, yeah, 90 feet tall. So, our building is about 30 feet tall. So, it's about 3 of our buildings stacked together. That's how tall this image was. 9 feet wide, that makes him very skinny, and so there's some idea that maybe there's a pillar that the statue is on. But I would get you to think, when we invaded Iraq and we were toppling statues, the statues of Saddam Hussein, those are about 50 feet tall. So almost twice the size of those statues. Now, how does a person get to that point where they believe they're a god? How is that possible that a person would think of themselves as a god?
Power, money.
Okay, power and money for sure, right? And you know, to quote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And so they, you know, in that world, he has this great, responsibility. And you start thinking that with that immense power, you're responsible for everything that goes on, right? What else? What's going on in your mind that you can start thinking that you are immortal?
Most people tell you you are.
Okay? People start telling you you are. I think that that's probably a big part of what's going on here. Because remember last week we had all of those magicians and satraps and Chaldeans and all of these people that were going in there to talk to the king, right? And he was smart enough not to let them just try to explain his dream. He said, you have to tell me the dream and then explain it. That's how I will know that you have received a true vision of what my dream was about. Nebuchadnezzar was smart. I said that last week and I continue to uphold it. I think he's smart, but his power has gone to his head. And I think he has let those around him start to, they have moved from saying, King Nebuchadnezzar, you're like a god, to putting him up there with the God. All right? We see it today in our world. The supreme leader of the Republic of North Korea, contends that he is elevated up there with God status. And that, that they have done that. The Juche is their religious belief kind of system. It's not really religion, it's more of just a system of belief. And it has led them to this idea that he is beyond normal, and the people are brainwashed this with all of their lives, and they believe that he is like a god. And we still see it today, the same kind of thing. Saddam, I think, he never proclaimed himself to be a god. In a Muslim nation, that definitely is not going to work very good, but you saw the same kinds of actions with him when he was in power. Okay? So, how does that work for the Jew? How many gods can they have? One. And he's not it. Okay? So, this is going to create problems. So that's what follows on now with the rest of this. So, I will also get you to think about something that's trying to happen here. In chapter 1 or chapter 3 and verse 1, mine says in the plain of again, I need to stay by this. It says in the plain of Dura. Does anybody have a plain of something else in there? Chapter 3, verse 1, it says that he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Okay, so there are a couple of translations that you could say the plain of Shinar, which would be another option. Okay, so just so you're clear on where we're at and what we're talking about and why I think this becomes very significant. So one of the possibilities is that it would have also been called the plain of Shinar, the plain of Dura, and those are kind of connected places. So let me take you back to Genesis chapter 11. Now the whole earth used to have the same language, it used the same words. And it came about as they journeyed east, and they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and settled there. And they came together and said, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they used bricks for stone, and they used tar for mortar. And they said, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven. And let us make for ourselves a name, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. You guys know what story I'm reading? Tower of Babel. Babylon. This is the same place. It's the same plain. They came together to make a name for themselves and to make themselves like gods. Amazing how history repeats itself. So we're right back in the same spot. King Nebuchadnezzar sets up in the plain of Dura or Shinar in the province of Babylon. He sets up this giant statue to honor himself, right? Make a name for himself, to try to thwart God's plan. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the province to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces were assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. They stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set. So you have all of these different classes of people that they're being called. So I make you think back again to Genesis 11. All the different peoples had come together to try to make this name for themselves. I think you have imagery here that is trying to draw you back to that same type of moment that Nebuchadnezzar is trying to make a name for himself. And so he's gathered in all these different people from all these different places, and that they are going to be there for this dedication ceremony. And then the herald loudly proclaimed, to you command is given, O peoples of the nation, men of every language. Isn't that interesting? Men of every language. Trying to bring it all back together. That at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psaltery, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. Therefore, at the time when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psaltery, the bagpipes, and all kinds of music, people of all the nations and the men of every language fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. All right? So they've all come together. The horns and all I can think of is every time I read this one, I think of Dr. Seuss's The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, and all the loud noise with their who's-its and what's-its and the clanging of their, whatever's, and I love that because that's the image I have in my mind anyways. Y'all put whatever you want in there, but that's the sound I hear when they say the sound went off. And so the sound goes off, and what does everybody do? They fall down in worship. So this is one of those moments where if you're a Jew standing in the midst of this assembly, you have now put a challenge point into your life.
Brett, I was going to say one other statue we might be familiar with is of Sam Houston, just south of Huntsville, it's 67 feet tall.
Okay. The one of Sam Houston down there in Huntsville, 67 feet tall.
So it's supposed to be 10 times its height, which was 6 foot.
Right. So another kind of an image of trying to get you to figure out how tall this statue is. Big enough that you can have a pretty large assembly and everybody's going to see it, right? And so you bring on...
Was it a plane?
In a plane, yeah.
You could see it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's why do you pick a plane? Because you want everybody to see it. So, yeah, if you've ever lived in the mountains, you don't know what's a mile over most of the time. Yeah, so he's done this on purpose, selected a location, which I'm guessing is why we selected it the first time when they were trying to build, when the people were all speaking the same language, they went to the same place. Yeah, so obviously, kind of the same thing. All right, so this has created a specific point for them. The Jews can only worship one God, and any Jew that's there is going to have a struggle. So for this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. And they responded to King Nebuchadnezzar, the king, O king, live forever. You yourself, O king, have... so wait a minute. Live how long? Forever. I told you, people are feeding this into his ears. Jim is exactly right.
They're telling him what he wants to hear.
They're telling him what he wants to hear. They're tickling his ears. O king, may you live forever. You yourself, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of all those instruments should fall down and worship the golden image. Verse 11. But whoever does not fall down and worship will be cast in the midst of the blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over your administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. So, they go up to the king and they call out Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I don't know where Daniel is. Quite honestly, no one does. He is not in the list. Daniel, we know later on, he ends up having a lot of duties. He's in a lot of different places. I don't know why he's not here. I tend to think that it's because Daniel himself is trying to recount the story for us, and so he's sharing with us these events, right? The other thing I would wonder, Daniel is a prophet, but there's no real prophecy in this chapter. So I'm wondering if Daniel had seen all of these events himself and is revealing them to us as he had seen them. It does not say that. That is a guess on my part. But Daniel is not involved in this story at all, which is unusual. So that's why I pointed out. It seems odd that he's not there as a part of this group. The other side of that is we know in chapter 6 he's going to have similar issues, and so we're going to come back around to him as well. But we have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They get called out. They say, hey, king, you said if somebody didn't bow down and worship, you're going to throw them into the fire furnace. These three guys didn't do it. And, of course, king he becomes angry. He brings them up there, asks them, is it true? And, that you heard all the clanging and all that, and you didn't do anything. Go down to verse 16 to give their answer, right? So, Nebuchadnezzar, O Nebuchadnezzar, no, live forever, right? I think they're speaking truth here. O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire. So, throw us into the fire furnace. God will deliver us. The second part of that, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So, these guys, I think, give a wonderful and clear statement of truth about what, for most of us, happens in a declaration of faith like this. We go back and we look at early Christian history, and a lot of Christians were challenged in a similar fashion. They either had to deny their God and worship the Roman gods or whatever it was, or they were going to die. And many of those Christians died. God doesn't save them all. He did not go out there and provide for them. These three gentlemen stand there before the king and said, our God has the power to save us. And that's what most Christians said, is that God can save us. But the reality is, if he doesn't save us from this, he has already saved us. And he is still our God. We will not worship these false idols of yours. And they stood their ground. Have you ever had to do that? I can't imagine a situation where I have been asked to truly, quite literally, answer yes or no to that question of, do you believe enough that you're willing to die? I've had some survival training, some schools that I went to where that was definitely put out there on the table. What are you going to do with that? How are you going to face that? And, you're when you consider it in its most real form, that you may suffer and or die because of the declaration of your faith, that really challenges you. What do you really believe? I don't think there were a lot of false Christians in the first and second century, because they were being challenged to declare their faith on threat of death. It's hard to be fake about your beliefs when you are doing that way. So different than here, and it may change someday. We've talked about that in our Bible class in different times, different places, that it's changing in a lot of ways, but we don't face a challenge to our ability to come to church, to practice our faith, and do what we do. And what Daniel's book is about, as we go through these first 3 chapters, is challenging the faith of these individuals to be bold, to be willing to die in these instances. So this is interesting, right? Because I want you to think about big picture. Why are these 4, Daniel and the 3 that we're looking at now, why are all 4 of them in Babylon? Did they decide to take a vacation there? What? They were chosen, but why are they chosen? What's this? You what?
Captivity.
Yeah, they're taken captive. They're prisoners, really. I mean, they've got good jobs for prisoners, but they were really, they're prisoners. Why had they been taken captive? Why had all of Jerusalem been taken captive?
This will be sins of a nation.
What?
Sins of a nation.
Sins of a nation. What? Because God said so. What did you say, Lewis?
Disobedient.
Disobedience. What were they doing?
Worshiping other gods.
Worshiping idols. These 3 guys are also making a statement about the whole history of Israel. Everything that they should have been doing is exactly what these guys are doing. And they didn't do it. They had worshipped false idols, and they had bowed down to them, and they brought in Asherah poles, and they brought in all of the stuff that turned God against them, so that he said, I'm going to give you over to the Babylonians. Told them that ahead of time. Through Jeremiah and through Ezekiel. God said, I'm going to turn you over to these other nations if you do not change your ways. So by the time we get to Isaiah, Isaiah just says, they're coming. He does not preach a message of repentance and God's change. He just says, you're going to suffer. And they do. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego become that moment of faith that Israel had been challenged with really their whole life. And they are now having to say, do we really believe? And they say, yeah, we do. And we'll die for it. Our belief is that God can save us, but even if he doesn't, we will never bow down and worship your gods. Right? So, if you think you're a god, you've set up a statue to yourself, you've asked everybody to bow down and worship you, you get a little irritated at this kind of talk. And so Nebuchadnezzar in verse 19 was filled with wrath, and his facial expression was altered towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So remember that in the previous chapter, because of Daniel's ability, he had been given whatever he wanted. One of the things he'd asked is that his 3 companions would be elevated along with him and that they would get some benefit. King Nebuchadnezzar, I think, initially brings these 3 guys in there and is like, I need you to explain to me what's going on. And they turn around and say, we're never bound down, king. Never. And he becomes filled with wrath. And I think this is the Bible's nice way of saying he was red-faced. Right? He was so angry he wasn't seeing straight. So, he orders that the furnace is heated up, right? And furnace, I read an article as I was going through this. It's talking about, when we think about furnaces, probably what they're referring to is a pottery furnace. And they had really big pottery furnaces. They didn't have a lot of, the technology that we use for making dishes and that kind of stuff wasn't there. It was pottery, and they made it on a large scale, so you had a really big furnace. They would cast all of their pots. Refer back to Jeremiah chapter 17 or 18. They made all these pots, they put them in the furnace, built a huge fire, and heated the whole thing up, and that fired their pots. And that was the way they did all that. So they were big. So they made a fire in there, and they get it hot. How hot? Come on, help me out. Just a
7
little bit.
times more than normal.
Yeah, there we go. It's really hot. 7 times hotter than normal, so that the guys that were taking Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to the furnace, it was so hot when they opened up the furnace, it killed those fellas. I felt bad for them every time. I don't think they did. I don't think Brooke has a clue what she's about to get herself into. I promise you that. She doesn't, does she, Jay? I'm proud of her. She's going to have a great time, but she doesn't know what she's about to get into. So. She only got the recruiter speech, and I promise you that's not truth. Verse 24, then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was astounded. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me back up. Verse 23, but these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace while they were still tied up. The king was astounded, stood up in haste. He responded and said to his high officials, was there not 3 men cast bound into the midst of the fire? And they answered the king, certainly, O king. Look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about the midst of the fire without harm, and the appearance of the 4th is like the Son of God. So guess who showed up? This is one of those where we wonder, about Jesus' appearances prior to through his birth, through the incarnation that we get in the gospel message. Jim had a series of lessons. We talked about different things. In the Old Testament, there are a lot of references to the angel of God, the angel of the Lord specifically, and there's times when that angel shows up and it's worshipped as if it's God, and that angel does not stop them from worship, and so that says to me there's something different about that. Here, though, specifically, it looks like the sons of God. I think Nebuchadnezzar is not necessarily trying to give that, but I think unintentionally he has given us the answer that God has showed up in the midst of the fire to deliver these guys. Right? So God has showed up, and not just that, he took the ropes off of them. They were tied up when they were thrown in there, and Nebuchadnezzar says, wait a minute, I see 4 guys in there, and we only cast in 3, now there's 4, and they're not tied up anymore. They're walking around. Now, why is that important? We skipped this for a minute, and I apologize, but let me come back to it. You go back a little bit, and it describes the clothes that these guys are wearing, right? When they come out of the furnace, there's no smell of smoke on them. I think that's part of the reason that they described that they had clothes on. So they go into the furnace wearing clothes, they come out of the furnace, their clothes don't even smell like smoke. If you've ever stood around a campfire and then you walk in the house, what do you smell like? You smell like a campfire still, right? So normally you'd still smell like the smoke, especially if you're standing in the middle of it. But, so, if you do that, they got the clothes on, the clothes don't burn up, so that would imply that if they were tied up, the ropes wouldn't have burned up. So somebody untied them, is the point. They were untied and set free. Okay? So, we watch this take place. Nebuchadnezzar comes to the furnace door and he says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. Alright, so Nebuchadnezzar, he thinks too much of himself. He continues to have this struggle of thinking he is a God, and again, I think that's because people are saying it to him, he starts believing it, and then that becomes his thing. But he's still not an idiot. He recognizes that these gentlemen have just been touched by God. And so they come out in the midst, and so verse 27, the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the king's high officials gathered around and saw in regard to these men that the fire had no effect on their bodies, nor was the hair on their head sinned, nor were their trousers damaged, or had they smell even come upon them. These guys have been in the fire, but there's no signs of fire when they walk out. And that's the full provision of God, full salvation, we might say, right? Not just partly, but full. Yeah, Lewis.
Is there a reason why, when he looked in there, in the Bible, it says the Son of God with the little g, and then when he tells them to come out, it has Most High God with the big G. Is there something that they're trying to tell us there?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we're always trying to be careful with what Bible people are doing, because people are making some interpretations for you by the way they print text. But I think this one's probably correct. What they're saying, and I think Nebuchadnezzar's statement about looking like the sons of gods, is that he is referring to what he might think of it as the pagan pantheon of gods.
My version says a God, it looks like a God.
And so, does it capitalize it or just a God? Little g again, so just a God. But then when we say Most High God, now we're talking about our God. I didn't look up the word specifically here, Lewis. I apologize. I can't tell you if what they changed for the words there. So this section is also the section that's written in Aramaic and not Hebrew. And so there is real likely that I can go in there, and I don't know Aramaic, so I'll just have to look at commentary and we can look at it. But it's clear that he is specifying our God in that second statement. Whereas in the first statement, he's just referring to God's little g in general. Whereas in that second statement, they've capitalized it because God Most High, or Most High God, is a specific name for the Hebrew God. So yeah, that is intentional, and that's why. And I would agree with what they're saying.
Wonder what happened to that statue?
They never tell us. But
What'd you say?
Allies tore it down.
yeah, allies tore it down. They got blown up in a bombing run, I think. Well, what I would also say is that Nebuchadnezzar, his kingdom did end. He does die. So somebody tore it down. The next king would have torn that thing down.
Indiana Jones already.
Yeah. Indiana Jones found it.
Well, they did now, we passed himself.
Yeah. So, some of the thoughts that might be interesting if you think about that. Statue made of gold. Go to 2 Kings chapter 25. 2 Kings chapter 25 is where Jerusalem is going to be sacked. And one of the things that they take is gold from the temple. So, again, I want you to think in terms about what Israel should have been and what God allowed to have happen to them, because they would not stand up for what God had told them to stand up for. If they would have, stayed faithful to God, He would have stayed faithful to them and protected them. But as it was, they continued to go to these foreign gods and turn away from Him. So Nebuchadnezzar responds, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent His angel and delivered His servants, but who put their trust in Him." Wow. Nebuchadnezzar knows what's going on. Violating the king's command and yielding their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own God. And I don't know if yours did it right there, Lewis, but my Bible, again, kind of in our traditions, it says not to serve any god, lowercase g, except their own God. In my Bible, capitalize that because, again, we're talking about the real God. So there is a difference there. "Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks anything offensive against God, the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way." Again, so we had a capital G about their God, small g's about any other gods. And you recognize that. Then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the province of Babylon. All right, so anyway, Nebuchadnezzar is able to understand and to recognize that this is the Most High God. At the same time, he never says there is only that God. He's always in the context of the others. Theirs is the highest because he's been proven it. And Nebuchadnezzar, I think, is smart in that he's willing to acknowledge that. But at the same time, he's still filled with all of the paganism and all the idol worship and all this that it's always been around him. And they're right back there in that plain where the Tower of Babel was set up so many years prior, and they're right back at it. Mankind continues to go and try to do these same kinds of things. And so now we don't see a nation being saved, but we see these three individuals being saved. God touches them directly, removes their bindings, and turns them loose. And I don't know what they were talking about. Seem to be having a conversation. But, it's one of those things where their faithfulness becomes an evidence to the rest of those nations. All these people who gathered to worship Nebuchadnezzar, who did they end up really recognizing that day? The Most High God, who really had been the one that had shown what power was. That gold statue is nothing compared to him going into that furnace and saving those three guys. A lot of other lessons there. I know I run out of time all the time, but I want you to think about, as you relate that, our minds and what we often think of ourselves, how we overinflate ourselves as human beings so many times. And these guys being able to recognize that I'll lose everything as long as I can have God. All right, you have questions? I know because we're outside, right? I know. So, all right, if you would bow with me in prayer, we're going to dismiss. Father God, we thank you and we pray that you will be with us. Father, I want to be faithful to you. I want to be bold in my faith. I want others to know that you're my God and that you're the one I serve. I pray that you would help me to be that way and that everyone here will be able to walk out of here with that kind of faith. We thank you, Father, for your love, for your graciousness, for your promises of the future. We ask this in Jesus' name.